Guys, we are delighted to announce that we are working with the one and only One Football app where you can follow your favourite team, your favourite leagues, and of course, get in-game notifications straight to your device.
And guys, that is not all. One Football are now offering people in the UK and Ireland the chance to watch selected match highlights and live games from some of the best leagues in the world. I'm talking Serie A, La Liga, Liga Portugal, and the DFB Pokal, including a Saturday night live Serie A game. So what more could you want? What are you waiting for? Head down to the link in the description below and download the One Football app. Hello everybody and welcome back to Sweet and Sour Soccer, and I think it's about time we had that conversation on this channel. Of course, I am on about Newcastle United and whether I think they could actually make the Champions League this season, because currently Newcastle United sit within those Champions League places and they are currently more than a quarter of the way through the season now. So I think we really do need to have that conversation, and for me to give my 2 pence on this conversation, because it is something people are continuing to speak about. Guys, before I jump into the video today, as always, do me a massive favor, do hit that like button. Please do subscribe to the channel and do download the One Football app. Link can be found in the description. But let's jump in and kick on with this video. And I'm going to be giving my thoughts today on whether I think it's actually achievable, because it's going to be something that's going to be continued to be spoken about. Now, Newcastle, again, in fantastic form. And to be honest, Newcastle have been in fantastic form ever since Eddie Howe took over. And I think when you actually look at when Eddie Howe took over to the end of last season, it was noted then that if Newcastle had kept that form throughout the season, then they would actually have qualified for Champions League football. So this is something which really you can almost say that Eddie Howe has been achieving Champions League level form since the moment he took over, which is why another reason which I don't think you can now just really just speak about the fact of, is it just something that, you know, a good start to the season? I genuinely think you've got to consider whether Newcastle United have what it takes to be finishing in the Champions League by the end of the season. Now, of course, one thing that is going to be the big elephant in the room of this, of course, we know Newcastle in absolute great form. You've got players playing in form, but they've never played before, really. You know, Almiron once again bagging a goal again today, another well-worked run by him, and obviously a nice finish as well. Did really well to take that finish and also to beat a player. It was not an easy goal at all. You've got players like him playing out their skins, and then obviously players like Guimaraes. You've got players like Botman as well, who have come in, really shored up that defence, who have got that absolute quality to them. The elephant in the room, though, that I am going to get onto is going to be the World Cup, because I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be looking forward to the World Cup. Teams like myself, the club I support, Wolves, we're definitely looking forward to that, getting a new manager in. I think maybe even clubs like Aston Villa, who, you know, will like some time in Emirates. You've got other clubs as well, maybe not doing as well as what they initially thought, and are really wanting this break. But for Newcastle, it must be the most unwanted thing in the world, because, of course, there's such a buzz among the fans. I mean, I've listened and watching rather the game against Southampton today, and even on the telly, you could hear the Newcastle fans from minute one just absolutely loving life at the moment. But also the players as well. As I say, players like Almiron playing out their skin, showing levels that we've never seen before. It's really something that they're not going to want. And you do wonder then, when it comes back in after the World Cup, you do wonder if there's, you know, Newcastle, are they going to have that same consistency? Are they going to have that same buzz around them? Or is the buzz actually going to be taken away from them? And I think with that question, you've got to look at the fixtures that Newcastle have when they return ultimately. Of course, we know that they finish before the World Cup with a game coming up against, top four contenders at the moment in Chelsea. But after the World Cup, they've got Leicester and then Leeds, and that is how they finish the end of the year. Now, that for me is, look, I think Leicester have turned a corner. We've also seen Leeds, the last two games, they've obviously picked up back-to-back wins. But I think Newcastle will see those as very winnable games, especially the one on New Year's Eve. I mean, Newcastle is always a great place to go on a night out, but New Year's Eve, a game against Leeds United, on New Year's Eve. You can imagine that place is going to, St James's Park on that day is going to be absolutely incredible, especially with the Leeds fans as well. We know they can they bring a good crowd with them. It'll be one of those tasty matches. There'll be an amazing atmosphere. But I think there's two beatable teams then. And then one thing I wanted to point out, obviously the start of the new year with a hard fixture against Arsenal. But after that, the next fixture against what you would call the typical Big Six, of course, the typical Big Six being Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, Chelsea, United, and I'm missing one more, Spurs. Who can forget Spurs? Obviously, their next fixture against one of the typical Big Six doesn't actually come to the 18th of February. Now, what you've got to bear in mind there as well is that Newcastle will actually have a full transfer window then. And I will allow other clubs around them to spend more, but I do expect Newcastle to go back into the transfer market. So I really do feel when you look at those fixtures, I don't think any Newcastle fan is really going to be looking forward to the break and the World Cup. But I do think with the fixtures, they've got enough to kind of just start them off well and get that whole buzz back very, very quickly, which means they won't kind of lose that momentum that they've currently got at the moment. I also think as well, not having, another typical Big Six opponent until the 18th of February, which is Liverpool, does mean that we do know the transfer window is going to be a massive thing for Newcastle. We expect Newcastle to spend more. At the moment, though, you're kind of looking at what Newcastle bring in because they just look superb in the way that they're playing. But, of course, we do expect more money to be spent. We expect a few more quality signings, maybe some more depth to the squad. And, of course, no more European football either, which of course a lot of other clubs will be. Of course, but even Pep Guardiola this week spoke about the fact that he sees Newcastle as title contenders because at the moment, the one team that's around there that have no European football. And now he said that he does honestly believe that they could even go one better than challenging for the Champions League, but could actually challenge for the title as well. Now, I don't know whether that's a bit of speculative mind games from Pep. Who knows? But in some regards, I think he has a point. I do think that will help, especially later on in the season, because what you've got to bear in mind as well is the fixtures are really congested this year, especially with Europe. We're going to have the FA Cup. We're going to have the League Cup. And, of course, the World Cup. There's going to be a lot of tired players come the end of the season. And I think Newcastle not having the extra games. And, of course, we've seen Jurgen Klopp, for example, really complaining about that. I think that really is going to help Newcastle. I do. I think that will give them an advantage going into that second half of the season, especially maybe towards the last 10 games. I think you could see a lot of the Big Six if they've done well in like the cup competitions, and if they've, the players that they've got have gone far in the World Cup, etc., really maybe starting to suffer a bit with the tiredness of all these games and the fixture congestion. And I think you've also got to you've got to kind of look at the other teams that may be challenging for the top four when we're speaking about whether Newcastle can make the top four. And if I go through them sort of one by one, let's start off with a bit of a surprise package, but I think we've got to give them the respect of mention them quickly, and that is Brighton. Now, Brighton, one thing you would say is that a lot of their points they accumulated was under Graham Potter. Having just seen them beat my team Wolves yesterday and having watched quite a bit of them, I do think they look very good going forward. But one thing I would say is that maybe going under the new manager especially, I wouldn't say they're a top four contender purely just because of the fact I don't think they have that strong enough defence. And of course, that is one thing that Newcastle have. At the moment, only two other teams can say that they've boasted just one loss. And those other two teams are the two teams sitting top of the table in Arsenal and Man City. Interestingly, also, a stat today, of course, is the fact that Newcastle have only conceded one goal in the first half. And it shows how Eddie Howe builds up, doesn't he? It's a way where, first off, it's make ourselves hard to beat, and then we'll go and get them in the second half or a bit later on in the first half when we've built our confidence. And I think that's another thing that sets you up really well. But the other more typical challenge that you've got, let's start off with United first. United, for me, personally, I don't think they've got that good a squad. I honestly don't. I don't think there's great depth in the United squad. And even when I look at the starting 11 now, I don't think that starting 11 is that much better than... would I even say it's better, actually? I don't even know if I would say it's better than Newcastle's starting 11 anymore, because, you know, you kind of look at the team they've got. We know that they've got a few superstars, but for example, Ronaldo, he's not in favour. He's aging. There's talks of him moving on in January. There's some good names in there, but I personally don't think United's squad and even starting 11 is that much stronger than Newcastle's, to be honest. I really don't, unless they go out and spend a lot of money in January. But we know Newcastle can do the same. So, I fancy Newcastle to give them a competing with United throughout the course of the season. We speak about Spurs as well next. And, of course, Spurs, another team, which I think, if I'm being fair, I think Spurs is... first 11 is obviously better than Newcastle's. I just feel that on paper, if we went and looked at it on paper, and I know Newcastle fans, you might disagree with me on that one, but I do think their first 11 is probably just a bit better. I don't think there's much in it, but I do think it's a touch better. But there's a bit of negativity around Spurs, which shouldn't typically help. You know, you've got Conte talking about the fact that ultimately they need another 5 transfer windows. You've got some Spurs fans even questioning Conte a little bit. There's a bit of a negative vibe around Spurs at the moment. And then next you move on to Chelsea. I really do like Graham Potter, and I do think he's going to get it right with Chelsea. But one thing I would say about Graham Potter is I think he's going to need a lot of time. We're seeing yesterday, obviously, Arsenal got the win, but they were much the better team. And to be honest, I think Chelsea kind of lucky to only lose 1-0 in all honesty. But I think Graham Potter has shored them up very well defensively, but they just look a bit clueless going forward. And I don't think it's the kind of forwards that Potter actually wants. I mean, of course, we've seen, for example, Raheem Sterling almost having to play as a wing back. So I think it's going to take Chelsea some time to develop a squad again. Whether they can do that in January or not is another question. But I think Potter is going to need time. And the last team, obviously, that I will speak about is Liverpool. Now, Liverpool, for me, an aging squad. I don't think they look the same monster that they used to. I do expect them to come a bit stronger, maybe after the World Cup, and I do expect them to pick up some form. But what I'm kind of saying in this, and the whole reason I wanted to speak through these teams, is that I see 2 very, very strong teams, and I see Man City and I see Arsenal. But the other 2 teams, the other teams that I've mentioned, to be honest, apart from those big 2, I don't think there's anything that Newcastle should really fear. And I think on their day, and I think just even throughout the course of the season at the moment, they can compete with these guys. And I think, you typically throw the aspect that these big clubs can go out and they can spend their money in January. Well, guess what? So can Newcastle. So I think in conclusion, when we're talking about whether we should really be starting to take Newcastle seriously for the top 4, in all honesty, I honestly think we need to. And I do actually believe that Newcastle, if they can keep up that form when they return from the World Cup, will get Champions League football this season. But in all honesty, and I think even the Newcastle fans will agree, I think just getting Europe this season would be a massive, massive achievement. But yeah, I think they've got what it takes. Guys, let me know in the comments. Do you think Newcastle have what it takes to get into the top 4? Do let me know in the comments. And also do hit that like button, and please do subscribe to the channel as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on another video. Take care. Have a good evening. Goodbye.